Hi, everybody. Oh, good. Sarah got it.
Hello. How's it going?
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eric, for getting us this link. How are we doing in setup? Leslie, do you want to go through anything with the Otter AI before we jump in here?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we're just kind of testing Otter AI for live transcription during the events. We want to see if we want to use this for our events, so we're kind of testing it out during this meeting. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's any particular setup involved.
Cool. Thank you, Leslie, for setting this up. And so there's also that live link, I think, that Eric's dropped in at the top of the chat here. So we can see our words appear in real time. That's awesome. All right. Another tool for amphoskepsis for the current generation of okay. Well, today we've got a number of things on the agenda. Leif's joining us to talk about People's EPA. Steve's got an update on the watershed notebook. The Chelsea crew has been investigating different lines of research there, and Leslie's got some updates on outreach. And so I thought we would do a quick check-in. I'm stepping in for Lourdes right now because she's busy today, and building off her check-in question for last week about something new that we've done, I thought we could, celebrate our consistency and routine in this check-in question with, what is something that you do kind of daily that keeps you sane, keeps you in kind of routine and the benefits thereof. So I can start, and this is really just a routine since Ryan is that I can't function in the day without having a cup of coffee. So that making it out of bed and turning the kettle on for me is a very important first step of the day. Does anybody else want to go next, or I can just pass it around?
I can go. I don't depend on this, but I love it. And but my roommate's cat is very needy, and every morning around when I'm sitting down here to work, he comes over and he mews and jumps into my lap, and he just stays there. And the only reason he's not there right now is because I had to go get my headphones. But it's definitely a delightful part of each day at this point. Colin, do you want to go?
Yeah, I would have to echo Sarah. I can't function without some morning coffee, preferably some nice iced cold brew. I will pass it off to Emily.
I've been doing this new thing where I stretch in the morning because I often will snooze my alarm and get right back into bed, and my alarm goes off 7 times, and I feel bad for my roommates, feel bad for myself because I can't stay out of bed. But stretching helps. So if you feel like you keep getting back into bed, I highly suggest it. I will pass it to Sonia.
Something that me and my roommate have been doing every day, because we get up pretty early, both of us. We play music in the morning while we make breakfast, which is kind of fun. So that kind of gets the day going. I'll pass it to Leslie.
Yeah, so it's also very, very difficult for me to get up in the morning because I'm not a good morning person. So I have this light. It's one of those specific lights that's supposed to simulate sunlight to wake me up. And also I know that I have to take my vitamins every day at the same time. So if I force myself to take them at that time, then I probably won't fall asleep again. And I'll pass it on to Annie.
I don't do this in the morning, but at night I like to plan out my day and bullet journal it. And that tends to take up a lot of time, which is bad, but I'll pass it on to Philip.
Definitely doing some sort of exercise every day, whether it's walking or, going to the gym. It just gets me ready for the day. I'll pass it to Hyun.
For me, I like to make time to just read something, nothing academic, just something fun. I'll pass it to, let's see, Elizabeth.
So I rely on waking up to a very aggressive song in the morning because it's the only thing that will make me feel conscious. So as of lately, it's been Nightmare by Halsey is what I wake up to. So I'll pass it over to Eric.
Everyone, yeah, plenty of routines, coffee, tea at specific times of day. Cats are regular kinds of creatures, so there are a lot of cat specific routines in my life. What else? Yeah, I mean, obviously, over the past year, there's just been even more routines than I think normal. So, yeah, I'd pass it to Steve.
Well, I used to be a running addict, but I got cured of that. And but I still need some exercise to get some endorphins going or whatever. So yeah, pretty much every day with that. Leaf, have you gone?
Yeah, I also need coffee, but I need it all throughout the day and into the early evening. But one thing I do is usually cook something. I like cooking, and that kind of is a stress reliever for me. So I usually cook something during the day. I'm not sure who else, who hasn't gone.
I think that was everybody.
Okay.
And so, Leif, you were actually first up on our agenda. Do you want to give a little background on A People's EPA and what you're all working on?
Sure. So, is there a way can I share my screen?
I think that's an Eric question right now. For
You should be good
everyone,
now.
here's a URL to A People's EPA. It's another edgy project that Leif has been co-captaining.
Yeah, so the People's EPA started partly as an idea of how to get a bunch of our interviews out that we've done with current and former EPA people. And then we decided to make it into something where it would be a bigger resource for people who wanted to get access to aspects of the EPA, understand the EPA, which is obviously a very complicated agency, and would be a place where we could kind of describe things in terms that would be accessible, at least to, the public that's interested in that sort of thing, journalists, activists, and so on, in a place where we could host Edgy's interviews and other things that Edgy does that give people those sorts of resources. So I'll show you, we launched this just at the end of last year, and it still is we're still populating it with a lot of content. But let me just share it and show you some of it. Okay, can people see it okay?
Yes.
Okay, so this is A People's EPA. The little eyeball moves here if you go around here. We had an awesome set of designers that helped us design this based on some of the EPA's early designs. So it's got a kind of 70s feel to it. But the idea is we'll have things like sets of formats of things like interviews, documents, which you can see down here, interactive visualizations. And then those will also be put together in some stories that kind of bring things together in a cohesive way and explain aspects of the EPA. So right now, the main one we have on here is about the origins of the EPA. It's just the 50th anniversary of the EPA, the end of last year. So we have kind of an introductory essay here, and then things that go with that, including a timeline of the origins of the EPA, and then things like specific documents, important documents that related to the creation of the EPA. So basically one of the things we're working on now is a story about the history, well, not just the history, but enforcement at the EPA. So we'll have an introductory essay on enforcement at EPA, why it's important, and it will include a timeline of the history of enforcement at EPA, key documents, interviews that we have, and interview clips that relate to enforcement, and some visualizations where we'll be able to show some of the data that we've collected at EDGI, long-term data on EPA enforcement that Steve Braun, who's a data visualization guy, is working on. So he's still working on these, but these are some of the things that will show aspects of enforcement at EPA. So anyways, what I wanted to talk to you guys about in part is, at a minimum, we want to use this as a way to connect people to the EEW website and the tools there, the reports that EDGI has done on EPA enforcement. But I also wanted to see if there were, other things, other ideas that you guys had. I mean, we kind of, we're limited in what we can do in terms of changing major web development things, because we're not web developers. We hired somebody to do this and stuff. But if there are things, documents or, other things that you think would be interesting to potentially include in this, I'd be interested to hear it. Or if people want to help do things like write up summaries of documents, including our own enforcement reports, or a description. We already have a link to EEW on this website, but if there are other aspects of that you want to highlight in certain ways, we could think about ways of doing that. So I don't have anything specific in mind. I just wanted to let you know that we're thinking of doing this, invite you to be a part of it, invite you to have, if you have any input or ideas about things to do for it.
Awesome, thanks so much. Leif, does anybody have any initial thoughts or feedback? I mean, I know we've been wondering about how to build a more accessible archive of the notebooks that are currently in existence. So I wonder if Kelsey has any thoughts on that. And also, do you have a particular timeline, Leif, that you're working on?
Nothing that's hard. We kind of, there's no particular news peg we're trying to hit or anything like that. I would like to get it out somewhat soon, like in a couple weeks or something like that. But if there's, so there's no sort of hard deadline or anything.
Thoughts, anyone, or people need a minute to think?
And you needn't have anything right now. You're welcome to message me, or we mostly talk about this on the EPA Conversations channel in Slack. So if you have ideas, you can put them there, or message me or anything like that. So don't feel like you have to think of something right now.
It's great. I mean, I think there's a lot of other things coming up in our timeline that would be good to maybe cross-advertise there, sort of in a temporary way, like when we have a Spanish language report event that Leslie's got coming up, that would be good to share through a People's EPA. I don't know if it's maybe a case for us making a short video about you, or just moving over a short video about you that sort of explains the project and why we're doing it. Seems like some short content, and we already have a video from way back when. We could re-edit for that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, something like that would be great. And also we can add, if we put the initial sort of enforcement stuff up there, we can always add more to it later. But yeah, anything like that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'm really curious what it looks like to add content or sections. I guess some of the stuff that we've sort of hesitated to release directly on our site or as blog posts through Edgy might make more sense here, because this feels a little bit more in the weeds. So maybe we could put links to all of the reports somewhere in here in a way that's different from the data visualization access, or link out to the notebooks. But I don't want to like drastically expand the scope of your website. So if it's like, okay, we can put this kind of linked list somewhere of here's a title, here's a link, and then it makes it itself, that works. But if it's more than that, it might be a huge project.
Yeah, I think something like that might work. Yeah, we're trying not to make it like a thing that has like tons of blog posts on it. It's more like a static and site with like, you know, kind of content in it that's going to be, you know, long-term sort of relevance and stuff. But if you have stuff that's like does a really good job of, you know, explaining aspects of enforcement, even if it gets into the weeds of stuff, you know, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm not stuff linking to things would be especially good, you know, as opposed to having blog posts on there. But like if there's like really good blog posts that help explain some of this stuff, then I think that would be great.
Yeah, I don't mean blog posts at all, actually. I mean just kind of the raw, like, hey, you want to look at this area? Here's the notebook. And then if you can't understand it there, then it might not be the right place for you to look.
Yeah.
And or the like 50 whatever reports that we already made, just having them be in a list somewhere other than just the EU website might be cool.
Yeah, I think we could do that. I mean, we could, well, you know, maybe we should talk more about like what that would look like. But yeah, I think something like that where we could, I mean, these things, partly they expand on there. So you could have a thing that just says, here's a list of, you know, reports for these reports, and then it would just expand if people wanted to see it all, but wouldn't necessarily be right there. Or if there's like just one link that goes to, you know, a page that's got all those or something like that. But
yeah, I do suspect this falls in the realm of like, we're good either way. And I don't want to say like, I don't know that this is the most important use of time within you or within what you guys are working on. So if you're looking for content, we have it, but I don't know that we need to do it. So I don't know, hit me up and I could spend a little time scoping it with you if you'd like.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, and we do have some content that might be useful to you. Like we have these primers written on each environmental law that we developed for our workshops. And to me, like the primary connection is like about the name of a people's EPA, and that EU is about trying to give people data tools to look at data. So it seems like something that's like, you know, one project that's in complement to a people's EPA is this effort to try and get this data out into the public sphere, and just a very short thing of like, here's a link to the website, here's a tool you can use to, you know, look up what's in your zip code kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's perfect for this kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Leif. Thanks so much for letting us know. And why don't we be back in touch with you next week with ideas?
Sounds great. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Leslie, you've got some updates on outreach?
Yeah, they're pretty quick updates, shouldn't take long. So I got one response from one of the groups for the Spanish outreach report cards. So I'm asking them again if they're up for having a meeting. And I'm currently waiting for the response. And I sent follow-up emails to the rest of the groups, see what they say. As for the watershed outreach, I'm pretty much ready to do the outreach. I just wasn't sure how people wanted me to do that, since last time we discussed either sending them individually to each group or sending them in groups, so that let's say like all the people from Ohio, so we would meet with all the people from Ohio at once. So I guess just waiting to hear back on that. Once again, I'm unsure about the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, because we were supposed to meet up last Wednesday again, because we didn't meet up last Wednesday since there was some confusion, and then they canceled before. And so then they said if there was that they were sorry that they were missing them, but that they just don't wanted to meet, and so they told me to give them some times, and I did, and they still haven't reached out back. So I'm just not really sure what's going on with that. Also, I scheduled a meeting with Mariev from Creating Fuentes for this Thursday to discuss translation and some accessibility options we could have. And yeah. Oh, and there's also code of conduct stuff. Just worked on some code of conduct stuff with Kelsey. I think it should be in the EU coordination channel. Some of the links to the notes, but I can send them right here. We're pretty much just trying to get a draft by next week. And then we'll share it with the rest of you all to get some feedback.
Thank you so much for those updates, Kelsey. Leslie, I was thinking about Kelsey because Kelsey, wasn't your connection with the Duwamish? What do you think there?
I don't actually have a contact with them. I had a contact with a similar area indigenous group who also doesn't get back to me. So I sadly, like, I would love to work with these groups, but if they don't respond, then I don't think it's going to be a good use of our time.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that that's the stage we're in, is trying to find partners. So I wouldn't take it on board, Leslie, but you can probably let it go after 3 tries if. All right, and Leslie and I are meeting at 4:30 to talk more about outreach if anybody's interested in joining that. Okay, anything else? Any other feedback you need? You don't need a code of conduct review quite yet, right? Kelsey and Leslie, do you need any assistance there?
Just to keep you apprised, we are meeting on Monday afternoon, or afternoon's my time, Pacific. And we're planning to have a draft by next meeting, and then we would put it in channels for review.
Great. Thank you both for that work. Just so everybody knows, that's part of the grant, is that we revise our code of conduct. So this is a really important step in our work right now. Okay, so we've got 2 more kind of major topics to discuss today. We've got the updates on the watershed notebook that Steve's been working on, and then the updates from the Chelsea Creek work. The major update there is that Green Roots has interacted with EPA, and on the 8th, the EPA is offering to meet with Green Roots and some of us to answer questions before the public meeting on the 15th. So we're kind of broadly working towards getting together a list of questions to ask EPA by Friday, the 5th, so that we can ask them on Monday, the 8th. And overall, the class is kind of working on 2 directions of work, and you can see they're linked here under links to project proposals. One vein of work is analyzing the existing permits and the proposed permit changes, and then the other group is working on a review of the EJ analysis that EPA's done. And so everybody's written down kind of updates here about what each group has been able to do, and I thought we could just take 2 minutes for everybody to be able to read those over and ask any questions on those updates. Broadly, the updates are we've been able to download the data for the current permits. And review and analysis is in process. And then we've hit a couple of hurdles with trying to extend the EJ analysis that we'd like to talk through, and 1 R hurdle that we'd like to talk through. So why don't we is that okay to take 2 to 3 minutes just to read over these updates? Okay, so let's just give that a shot. All right, do people need more time? Yeah. All right, folks ready to chat? Yeah, it's been really great to see this progress getting made in such a short period of time. So a couple of things that would be good to talk about is Frankie's been trying to analyze, sort of extending the EJ analysis and trying to look at what refineries are actually supplying these oil storage facilities. And Frankie, I wonder if you could talk about the steps that you've tried. And basically, we haven't been able to figure anything out. And so we're wondering if there are any other ways we could try to find this data, or if we should basically kind of just call a halt to this angle of research for right now. Frankie, you want to tell people what you've tried to do?
Yeah, so I've gone at it in a few different ways, trying to figure out information about refineries. The best I could find was just on Echo itself. They have in the detailed facility reports for each facility, they have the NAICS and SIC codes for the facilities. But you can't, I don't know if you can search on Echo facilities by their NAICS and SIC codes. I've tried to do it and it doesn't seem to work for me. But I found general information about NAICS codes for petroleum refineries, like the actual numbers. And we found information about like the top businesses. So the top petroleum refinery businesses by the NAICS code on the NAICS website. But I'm having trouble finding like actual connections between the facilities and the storage, like where the storage facilities in Chelsea get their petroleum from. There are refineries in Massachusetts, but I go to their websites and they don't really give you any details on who they're delivering their petroleum to, like how many different, what types of companies they're delivering it to. They kind of just have information about their own refinery as opposed to the connections that they have. I know I was trying to look up, for example, the Irving storage facility in Chelsea, and I was looking up Irving Oil petroleum refinery connections and potentially trying to find a route there. I saw that there was a refinery called St. John Refinery up like northeast of Maine in southeast Canada. But once again, I go to their website and it says they have a whole bunch of, they produce a whole bunch of barrels of oil, and they work with a lot of jet fuel industries and stuff, but they don't have direct connections with storage facilities in the US. It doesn't give you like a list of, okay, here's, I don't know if it's information that's just not available because they don't find it necessary to divulge to the public, or if it's just something I'm not looking at from the correct angle. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Does anybody have any additional thoughts for lines of inquiry? I tried to look up like shipping traffic in the harbor, because presumably like all of this oil comes in by boat, and they must have a place of departure where they gather their oil from. But I don't know if that bore any fruit, Frankie. It's quite hard to look at that data. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas. It would be great to share them. Eric, you've got a suggestion here in the chat. Is that relevant to?
No, the last one was just a very side note on what Frankie was saying about that St. John facility in New Brunswick. It's one that I've come across, and they export a lot of their waste their refining waste to Houston, actually. But yeah, in terms of looking up NAICS and 6 codes, I mean, technically you are able to do that through that website that I linked to. I don't know how effective it actually is or whether it really works, but theoretically you should be able to. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I think, yeah, it's challenging because for exactly what Frankie was saying, like these facilities probably don't explicitly tell you where they're getting their petroleum and where they're sending the refined product to. So I'm not really sure what to do there.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like Global Petroleum or Irving has their own refineries, as far as we can tell. Is that the case, Frankie, that you've not been able to find something that's owned by Gulf as a refinery?
Yeah, I haven't been able to find things that are the only thing that I found, like I said before, was the Irving Oil one. That was the St. John refinery in New Brunswick, as Eric was talking about. That's the only minimal connection. It's not like they're definitely getting their oil from there. It's just, this is an Irving facility and there's an Irving storage facility in Boston. And that's kind of the extent of the connection that I made.
Is there any map of all refineries in the US somehow?
I mean, so if we took the NAICS and 6 codes that Sky developed, the kind of list of oil and gas related codes, and then just plug that in, we could get all those facilities. No problem. Yeah. Does that actually, maybe that's the issue here. So, we could do that if that would be helpful.
Well, I think the overall goal here was to try and see, are all refineries also placed in EJ areas? To try and unite those data sets somehow. So what if I reach out to Sky and kind of see what her bandwidth is to think about filtering the data by the NAICS and 6 codes that she gathered? And maybe this just isn't something we could complete on the timeline of that Chelsea's working on, but we can at least say, it should be possible to know where the oil that's coming here, that's used here, is sourced from. That's data that the public should be able to access and should be part of the assessment for the EJ impacts of licensing the storage of this oil here. I think we can kind of maybe at least fairly make the data should be available argument. Okay, well, thanks everybody, and thanks Frankie for trying that. If nobody else has any other ideas, I think we'll move on quickly to the R issue that Hyun is encountering, and see if anybody has any advice on what he's been trying to do. Hyun, do you want to explain quickly what you've been trying to do and where you're stuck?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working on, just as like a side, like to maybe see if there's an easier way to compare the OR 2014 permits to the new drafts. And I know like some members of my group are like sort of manually doing it, which is like kind of tedious. And so like the goal is to look through all of the monitored makers and see if their like regulations have changed in any way. So I was going to try to use R to just like first download them as like Excel spreadsheets and then load them as data frames and then compare like the columns to see if like anything's different. But I guess a problem that I've had is that there are like different numbers of chemicals that are monitored in the new and old permits. So I would have to sort of filter them in some way to so that there's a like so that I would only have the chemicals that appear in both the old and the new ones. And I think I've tried using like a function like match _df that might work, but the problem with that is that I think I'm not able to match on like multiple variables, because there are like sometimes there are like multiple instances of the same chemical, except that they're just being monitored at different like rates. So like there's the monthly one and then the like quarterly one. So I would have to like match based on like two variables, I guess. But I've been looking more into that. So
I thought here maybe we could ask Megan, who knows a lot about R. I don't know if Kelsey or Eric or Steve have other thoughts.
I was wondering if we could maybe discuss this in the Data WG channel, and you know, if Hyun can share your R program, maybe we can look at share some ideas on that.
would this be in like Slack, the Slack channel? Oh,
yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, then we can have a little chat about what the what your problems are and see if we can figure it out.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not much of an expert in R, but I've used it a little bit.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that offer, everybody. There's two more updates on the Chelsea side of things. Is 10 minutes sufficient for discussion of the watershed notebook stuff, Eric and Steve?
Yeah, I'd say it's certainly enough to update, review the updates Steve made, but there is still a longer conversation to be had about how we want to actually summarize the info from that notebook. How we're going to display, pollutant discharges and all that. That may take longer than 10 minutes, but it's certainly enough to go through the updates and start to get at some of those questions.
And maybe we could have some kind of work on that as over the week and have that as a more substantive conversation next week with okay, the two remaining things were integrating things on GitHub and just whether or not how to just do the project organization here for these two research groups that are working. Kelsey, I don't know if you have thoughts there. And then Cullen has put together like a brief review of the major limitations of EPA's current EJ review that I think is really helpful. So Cullen's got about 5 minutes of presentation on that, if we could do that quickly.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, and then Kelsey, if you can let us know how you want to approach the organization of things, that would be great.
Awesome. So I can just run through this quickly. So I took a look at the EJ analysis that the EPA did of Chelsea Creek. This was just published on February 10th, so it is very recent. So just some background info on Chelsea and the Chelsea Creek. So out of all of the 5 facilities, they have about 250 million gallons of storage capacity. And these facilities have a total of 7 outfalls, 1 per facility, and then Global has 3 different ones. So when they're looking at their EJ analysis, they consider all communities within a 1-mile radius of Chelsea River. So this includes parts of Chelsea, Revere, and East Boston. There was also some mention of Everett and in some points of the review, but not all. So they do some basic demographic data based on census data. So 55% of this population is Hispanic, 65% does not speak English at home, and their average per capita income is just about 29,000 compared to about 40,000 statewide. So we can see that this is a high proportion of non-English speakers, low-income individuals, and minority populations. Additionally, just some background on the Chelsea River. It is considered impaired for all of its designated uses, which include aquatic life, aesthetics, primary and secondary recreation and contact, fish consumption, and shellfishing. And in the report, they actually do say that this is largely due to the petroleum facilities nearby and all of the effects that has on the water. So the main problem with this is the executive order, Executive Order 12898, that governs, that kind of requires them to do an EJ analysis in the beginning. So you can read the full text here, but it basically just requires each federal agency to make environmental justice part of their mission. But as we probably know, executive orders don't really give power to the EPA or more regulatory authority. It's rather just telling them that they should take EJ into consideration in any of their projects. So the problem with this that they cite in their report kind of succinctly that I'll just read through. It says, it is important to understand that the executive order is not a statute and therefore does not provide EPA with additional authority beyond that granted to the EPA by the Clean Water Act. Rather, EPA is required to implement the executive order consistent with and to the extent permitted by the existing law. Thus, this gives the EPA discretion to determine how best to implement its mandate within the confines of existing law, which here consists principally of the Clean Water Act. The EPA evaluated the impact of reissuing the NPDES permits to these facilities in relation to the status of and potential impacts on the designated uses of the Chelsea River. The executive order does not dictate any particular outcome in this permit decision, and the Clean Water Act does not appear to provide EPA with any general authority to impose permit conditions based on EJ considerations that are not connected to water quality impacts or technology-based limitations. So all of this to say, they do this EJ analysis, but they can't really use any of the information in the permitting decisions. So briefly, they outlined a few demographic breakdowns that I mentioned before based on census data. They also include some EJ screen percentiles. The main issue with this is that they compare Massachusetts state levels with national levels, which isn't really attributable to that very small 1-mile radius. They do include some maps of that study area in the appendix, but it's not discussed in the report at all. They present some health indicators, of which Chelsea has the highest rates of disease compared to Revere, Boston, and Massachusetts as a whole. Besides including this data, there's no further analysis of what these demographics and indicators mean in reference to the permits or facilities. So they basically just outline all of this data, but don't really further analyze it at all or consider it in any way. The only EJ consideration they make is in their public participation, where they outline the public commenting periods and making their materials available to the community in multiple languages. So they come to the conclusion that the EPA expects that the permitting actions at issue will not have a disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effect. I highlighted this part here on minority or low-income populations near the permitted facilities. I highlighted that because they really don't prove that at all or explain that. They kind of just say, so they come to this conclusion based on that the limits they're setting will hopefully not increase the pollution levels above the water quality criteria. And the water quality criteria are made to protect human health. So therefore, if it doesn't go above that criteria limit, then it's not going to have any health impacts on the community. This is just not really supported by anything. This also assumes no violations, whereas 6 out of the 7 outfalls had limit exceedances within the past 5 years. And they also don't consider any other environmental health factors such as Clean Air Act violations, greenhouse gas, RCRA, the transportation of the chemicals, and something that Laura brought up in the scoping document. They don't really consider any of the COVID-19 effects either. So that is my presentation. Basically, a lot of work that they created for no good outcome.
That's really cool, Colin. And I've been doing a fair amount of local politics public commenting recently because it's more available now that it's on Zoom and not in another city. And this is exactly the kind of thing that would work super well as a public comment. If we turned that into a first of all, like an edgy marked report to make it, you know, legit and kind of something that could be referenced back to and sent around, like submitted as an official public comment piece, and then also included some of the highlights of that as part of a script that might be used by people. Of course, we would want the local organizers to have heavy input on this because we don't want to tell people what to say per se, but like this is exactly the kind of evidence that you want to enter into the public record as a public comment. So that's really good work.
Yeah, I was telling Sarah that I would definitely be interested in helping develop some type of public comment or white paper, I guess, about this.
Thanks so much, Colin. Yeah, I mean, I think it's striking for me. I really hadn't realized how little power there is behind that executive order and how much of a performance it truly is. And so that's, yeah, I just thought it would be good to bring this to everybody else's attention too. We've got about 9 minutes left, so why don't we head over to the Watershed Notebook updates, and then we'll focus on like how to visualize this data next week.
Was that to me?
Oh, that was to Eric.
To Eric.
Well, Steve, I'm happy to share, updates for the work that you've done over the past week, but if you want to go ahead and share that, go for it.
Well, yeah, I don't have my usual environment here, so my screen's a little limited. I don't know if you've got
I can go ahead and share my screen. I have it up. Well, just give me 1 second. So this is a branch of the Watershed Notebook. So we've been working on some additions, and I'm not going to run, well, I will. Should have run it earlier. Well, I do have a version that's run. Here we go. So based on our conversations last week, Steve was able to make some really important updates. So usual stuff here, you pick a state, we load the boundaries of that state and load its watersheds. So one thing to note there is that we're still kind of working from a model where you start with one state. It's possible that we could allow people to select more than one state if they were looking at a tri-state area or something like that, but that gets into some potential database issues because then you're loading a lot of data if you've got multiple states. But what we have done is we've got all the watersheds in Iowa there. And now what you can do is actually select more than one watershed. So of course, there's going to be watershed groups that are interested in not just the Cedar River, but also maybe the Iowa River. So you can go here and select, the lower Cedar, the lower Iowa. This is kind of the default interface, but the middle Iowa, the middle Cedar to so on and so forth. And then, same old, we'll load all the data for the facilities that's in those 2 watersheds or more watersheds. And then we map that. So now you can see here we have 2 watersheds, the lower Cedar, the lower Iowa, and all the facilities in those. Of course, we also chart out, as usual, the bad actors. We've made that chart a little bit bigger, which is awesome because there's a lot to point out here. A lot of facilities regularly out of compliance. We now have the ability of looking not just at discharge monitoring reports, but also other Clean Water Act data. We get all the data for those facilities in those 2 watersheds. We get all those discharge monitoring reports. And then along the lines of like looking at multiple facilities or multiple even pollutants, okay, because we've just acknowledged, right, that cumulative impacts really matter and are important to consider when we're talking about environmental justice. You can select multiple facilities. So, I might be interested not only in, if I live in West Branch, I might be interested not only in the city's sewer treatment plant, but also the trailer park. So I select both of those, and then I get the pollutants released by both of those facilities. And I might be interested not only in nitrogen, but dissolved oxygen and pH. And then I load the data specific to those 2 facilities in those 3 pollutants. So we've opened this up a lot to looking at multiple things together. But there's still, the lingering question here is, and then we're just mapping that one facility. The lingering question here is, how do we summarize all that? Do we want to show, well, when you get into looking at multiple pollutants, sometimes the units by which those pollutants are measured are not comparable. And generally, do we want to show the total permitted amount for a watershed for that pollutant? Do we want to show the total amount actually discharged or reported being discharged? How do we actually want to kind of narrow in how we show and make sense of all this possible data?
Thanks so much, Eric. And Steve, really amazing to see that. Steve, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think he covered it very nicely. Yeah, it's in the different pollutants, looking at them, it's hard to put one interface that makes sense for all the different pollutants at once. So kind of customizing that's going to be challenging.
I'm wondering if, by next Tuesday, I hope that we're at the point where we can show some of the data visualizations from the oil storage facilities in Chelsea and kind of think about how those might be examples that we could draw on for different ways of analyzing and visualizing.
Yeah, that would be very good if we had some kind of sample visualizations to work toward.
Any last thoughts here? I mean, would it be helpful to have people try this revised version too? Because maybe we could go through now, Leslie, it might make sense for us to go through to the groups that we're going to do outreach to and just see what does it look like when we try and pull together data for the watersheds that they're interested in.
Yeah, whoever had the Pennsylvania one last week, that was kind of the impetus for this, because they had like 8 different watersheds they wanted to combine together. So.
Yeah, I actually ran this new revised notebook, and it's perfect for like that, like you were saying, that group I actually ran it on. And I ran one on the Ohio River Valley Foundation before, and you could mapping multiple watersheds makes it so much easier. I think it's really useful to bring up if you're doing these outreach meetings, showing them that you can do like all of the watersheds or most of the watersheds that they're looking for. So it was really nicely done, Steve.
Well, thank you. It kind of filters down from facilities to pollutants. And I don't know if it'd be useful to go the other direction as well, look at pollutants and then what facilities are emitting those. So we could pretty easily add cells that do that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you were doing it, I was thinking about benzene, you know, something that's a carcinogen that, you know, is frequently over emitted. And so, yeah, I mean, as I think for communities, it's almost like you want to go almost from the health effect to the class of chemicals. But, you know, that's a whole nother thing to aggregate. But benzene and the carcinogens might be a useful like set of starting points because they're just more actionable. But again, that could be something we really bring to community groups of like what are the compounds or health effects you're able to bring cases around. Great, but that brings us to 3 o'clock. Shall we wrap up for this week? And is there any last things people want to bring up? Okay, so hopefully next week we'll be able to look at some data visualizations from Chelsea and dive into this question more, and maybe even just have breakout sessions. And Kelsey, maybe we can return to some of the diagrams, the drawings that sketches that you did next week. Awesome. All right, well, thanks everybody. It's really good to see you, Steve.
Do you recognize the room, Sarah?
Oh, you